Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Downs. If you came here courtesy of the main CFZ TV YouTube channel, you probably know me best as the director of an organisation called the Centre for Fortean Zoology and the presenter of a twice-weekly web TV show called On the Track of Unknown Animals, which deals with hard science, weird shit and surreality. But, oh, by the way, this young man here is Captain Phonobulax the Magnificent, better known to his friends as Peanut. And if you're hearing a weird rumbling noise, don't adjust your set, it's actually Peanut purring. So he's got the loudest purr and, by the way, the most magnificent eyebrows of any cat that I have ever known. And I've known a lot of cats. The other night I was thinking that as I do regular interviews with people involved in music, arts, books and, other stuff, it might not be a bad idea if I started putting them up here on the YouTube channel. So I decided to start a new show which will be available on the channel in a new playlist, I think they're called, and it's called On the Track of Music, Arts, Books and other stuff. And I'm not going to tell you how many times a week it's going to come out because I don't know. I'm not going to tell you if it's going to have the same amount of input from the weird, sometimes make-believe, sometimes not, characters who infest my life and activities, because I don't know. But what I do know, it's going to have, the first episode anyway, is going to have me, that's me, and Peanut, that's Peanut. I hope you enjoy it. Back in 1979, I was living in Canada. I went there because I wanted to look for Bigfoot. I didn't look for Bigfoot in the end, but what I did do was to go and see a movie with one of my cousins, and the movie featured a band called The Who, and the movie was called The Kids Are All Right, and to this day is still one of my favourite rock movies of all time. And my guest this week is the man responsible for it. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce the one and only Tony Klinger. Well, good afternoon, Tony, my dear old friend, and I'm sorry that it's taken so long faffing about with the computer to manage to make it, hopefully, so we're both audible.
I know you wanted me to be like a priest today, so I give you my blessing. Carry on.
Okay, hang on.
Okay. What you got hidden under there? Another person? Oh, okay. Fair enough.
So, I better put all this away now, because that big knobbly thing around my neck is my alarm for when I fall over or get stuck.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It happens sadly more and more. Okay, how did you first get involved with The Who? What happened at first?
I was contacted by my friend David Courtney, as a composer, and he was producing an album for Roger Daltrey called One of the Boys. And in him doing that, Roger was looking for a video for the title track, One of the Boys. And I did that kind of thing. And so David contacted me. I had a meeting with Roger. I think I also had a meeting at that time with Bill Kirbishy, the manager of The Who, who was also obviously managing Roger. And we came to an arrangement for me to direct that video, which I did. And that video was very successful in America, particularly, where it's just before MTV started. So it was when they still made prints, film prints of what they then called pop promos. They weren't called rock videos, and they made 2,000 something prints of this. And we were fortunate enough for it to go out as a little thing with Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie. And so it got a lot of playtime. And as a consequence of that, it was going up the charts. That's a whole other story, what happened, on that issue. But what then happened was that when the Who were then thinking of making a film kind of documentary anthology, which later evolved into The Kids Are All Right, I was, I think, the first person that they spoke to direct the film. And so it led directly from the pop promo I did for Roger, then the meetings with Bill Curbishley, and then the other members of the band, all accepting Pete Townsend, who we later found out had other ideas which were nothing to do with me, not a fight or anything like that, just something I didn't know about till later.
Yeah, I thought when I was last reading your book that to find out that the main songwriter of The Who had already made other arrangements without even consulting his fellow band members or you must have been very galling.
It was more than galling. It was straight from the go. It was perverse. I was fortunate I didn't need the gig. And so my initial reaction when I got this news was, okay, I'm out of here. And I won't hold you to the contract, I'll go. But the other three members of the band and Curbishley reminded me by then that I had signed a contract and that I couldn't just go, and held me to it. And what had happened originally, apparently, was that Jeff Stein, who became the film's director, who I hadn't met, I didn't know anything about him, he was a big fan of the band. He was, I think, like 20, 21 years old. Put it in perspective, I was like 27. It's not like I was the old guy then. And he had been this fan following the band, in particular, had formed some kind of fanboy relationship with Pete Townsend. And he adored him, and I think Townsend liked him and his enthusiasm. And he was from a place called Poughkeepsie in New York State, I think. And he then went, and while Pete was, I won't characterize to say he was somewhere else mentally at the time, because I don't think, I just don't think he was really fully focused. I'll put that politely. He signed a piece of paper, a letter, I later found out, that kind of said in the event of there ever being a film made, Jeff would make it. And that predated the contract that I had. So I kind of accepted that. I didn't like it because I thought it was wrong for it to happen that way. But I said, okay, he's got the prior commitment, I'll go. But they wouldn't let me. It's kind of like that film, The Godfather. I kept trying to get out and they kept pulling me back in. It happened like 7, 8 times, in different issues. And what then happened was Bill, could be kind of forceful in those circumstances, literally brought Stein from New York and locked us in a room at my offices in Pinewood Studios, film studios. And so whoever comes out alive will be the director, the other one could be the producer. And I didn't want to have a fight with Stein, and Stein was feeling, I think, aggressive, but there was nothing to be aggressive. I didn't have a fight with him. It wasn't his fight with me. And I said, I'm happy to walk. I've already told them I'm going to go. And he said, you can't. I said, but you want me to direct? He said, no, I'm going to direct it. But you've got to produce it, because if you walk away, 3/4 of the money's going to walk, because the other band members don't want me to direct it. They want you to direct it. And so what then happened was, eventually I said, well, in any event, I think I've got to go. I just this is kind of nuts. And so we came out and I had that conversation in front of the guy who was supposed to be my producer when I was directing it, called Sidney Rose, who was a lovely fella. And he said, you can't walk away. And I said, well, not you now. And he did basically the death scene from Camille. He went down the floor. He said, I can't pay the school fees for my son. I'm going to die. And he's like, we've got oxygen, we've got a nurse. And I phoned my wife and I said, what do you think I should do? She said, well, it's only going to be a few months and it's a really good deal. Maybe you should do it. And, you'd be doing a good thing. And so I said that. Sydney immediately got better, jumped up. He was fine. And finally, enough, the next day when I came into the offices, he was in my office and he had dark glasses and everything like that. And I said, what are you doing in my chair? That's my chair. And he said, well, I'm your boss now because I'm the executive producer. And I told him, well, I can say words like this. I told him to fuck about my chair. And so that's how that all transpired. And initially, when we started to film, there were people on the crew, etc., that had serious doubts about whether Jeff could handle it. Um, I didn't know either way because I've never seen him do anything. And they had put on the channels of the walkie-talkies. We were filming in Shepperton, I guess, and we were filming a sequence with the band playing. Barbara O'Reilly. No, no, not Barbara O'Reilly. Barbara Rand, the Beach Boys, Barbara Rand. And I realised they had kept one channel that was going to me in the room where I was, and they were talking to him on another channel, and they were asking me for the shots. And it was like a preposterous situation. And so we tried to sort it out. We never really sorted it out. It was a film warfare. It's like you were on their side or this side. And it's strange because one thing I've learned is it doesn't matter how nice an experience making a film can be, you can still turn out a film that didn't work. Or however bad it could be, you can still turn out something that becomes a classic. And that's what happened. And it was despite our animus, I mean, it was like pretty much open warfare most of the time.
One thing that is very obvious that in the intervening years you've done all sorts of things, and I've never heard of Jeff Stein doing anything apart from The Kids Are All Right.
He did some videos, I can't remember the guy's name, that were pretty good. Oh, the guy died recently. Tom Petty. He did some of his
Oh, did
videos.
he?
Yeah, which I was impressed by. I mean, credit where it's due. If he was into it and he got the resources and everything, I thought those were pretty good videos. But I don't know what else he did, or if anything. Um, he, I think he did have ability, but he was very young and immature. And I suppose I was too, but not quite as young and quite as immature. And we were also dealing with Bill Curbishley, who could, was laser focused on what he wanted and what he wanted to achieve, and that was, commercially, he knew exactly what he wanted. And if you got in his way, it was like being hit by a steamroller. And we each got our share of that. It wasn't just me; it was also Jeff. And Sydney, who was a delightful man, I really liked him, but he was not the strongest person. I think it stress hurt him. And so he was kind of getting crushed from every side. I felt very sorry for him because whichever way he turned, he was going to upset somebody. And I always said to him, you best pick a side because that way you at least got some allies. In the middle, you're going to get hit by everybody all the time, which is what happened. And then there were the band members themselves. And anyone that knows anything about The Who and those four characters at that time knows that that was volcanoes waiting to explode at any point in time. And each one had very big opinions of themselves and what the band meant and all that kind of thing. And sometimes I think different motivations. Some was about money, some was about the music, some was about their part in the music, some was about, and so I think it was best indicated that when we did the music mixes, which went on forever. I mean, did them in Wembley, and then we did more in America. And it literally, because everything there was, everybody thought, oh, it's all the original stuff. It wasn't. It was remastered. Everything was redone, pretty much, and took months and months and months and huge amounts of money. And it basically what I remember when they were playing every time somebody came in from the band, they're like the John for the bass or Pete for the lead guitar or Roger for the vocals or Keith for the drum would go, right, it's not, you can't hear the drums, you've got to remix, you need more drums. Then John would come in, you can't hear the bass, got to have more bass. And it kept happening. And it was if you weren't involved, it would be kind of funny. But if you were involved, it was very aggravating. You kept having to redo stuff. And then when you got to the actual looking at the cut of the film, which by then was pretty good. I remember I looked down and I saw two of them with stopwatches. And I thought, what are they doing? And I said, why have they got stopwatches? They were timing how much they were in front screen time each. And it had to sort of equate. Things that when I look back at it, I think I must have imagined that. But I've actually kept, when I was writing the book, contemporaneous notes when we were doing this. And that's my notes of those days. It's not, I didn't imagine it. That's what was happening.
Were you a fan of the band before it all started, before you
Yeah.
were involved?
Yeah, I was. I didn't realize quite how brilliant they were live when you're in the room. I'd seen them a couple of times, obviously, as a young guy in London at the Marquee and things, but I hadn't realised how big and great they were live by the time we got to this point. And when I re-listened to Live at Leeds, which was my jumping off point for what we should be trying to go towards, and I thought this is probably the best live rock album ever made, in my opinion. And I was like, wow, I'm working with these guys. And when we first day in Shepperton, which I referred to earlier, when we put on and put on when they said, what do you want to play? And I shouted out something, and someone else shouted out something, and they started to play. And they hadn't played live anywhere at all in the world. They hadn't played together for like 2 years at that point, maybe a little bit more. And it just blew us all away. It was like you go, wow, no, I've never heard anything like that. And I've worked with very good bands and Deep Purple, people, great musicians, and it just was another level live. I thought sometimes when I got to know them better as musicians, not as people, I realised that sometimes the demos that Pete did himself, which we got to hear, were better than the final version. You know, it really was. I don't know why they never released some of that because it's just fantastic. First one, like that the Who Are You kind of era. And yeah, I was a fan, and things that were obvious to me became more obvious, like Keith Moon being able to lead a melody line on the drums. Well, that's exceptional. That not many people have ever done that. Like you're talking Buddy Rich level. I mean, like the best drummers ever. Forgetting rock drummer, this drummer, that drummer, the best drummer. And I think Keith was up there. By the time he was working with us, that energy level had gone down. And so it could last for a little burst, like maybe a few minutes. And then we had to give him oxygen or something, prop him up, give him a drink or something, because he couldn't maintain that level of energy, which was manic to start with. For a whole set, he couldn't. There was no way. If you could get 2, 3 tracks out of him, that would be fantastic. Because more than that, and he was doing harm to himself. And he did do a lot of substances. I know he's tried to stop, but he was trying to counterbalance the cocaine with the brandy, and you can't do that. You can't continue to do that unless you're a certain member of the Rolling Stones forever and still stand up. They just can't do that. And so that was going down during the course of the thing. I never realised quite how great, whether I liked him or not, a bassist Emerson was until I saw him work. He was just He was like a metronome. It's like just perfect. And Daltrey, what a voice for rock and roll. I mean, really, one of the best ever. And so you combine that with Townsend's writing genius, which he was. Um, I think the time when that started to dissipate was around the time we were making the film, because he was still writing. Although they were great tracks, don't get me wrong, I thought they were great tracks. Although he was writing great tracks, I didn't think they fitted where they were in life at that point. You know, he wasn't an angry young man anymore. He was an angry rich person. And so I think that was I'm keeping you awake now, John. But I think the time had come for some changes in their thought. Because if you don't do the changes, what then can happen is you're sort of parodying yourself. And it just becomes like what happened to the Beach Boys. You know, it's like you go, oh dear, that's well, you know, other than the Beatles, maybe the best rock band ever, and they're now like a Vegas act. No insult me, but that's what happened.
Mm. I always got the impression watching the film, and I didn't know about the problems with you and Klein. I didn't know about any of that until many years after. But I was actually at the premiere of the film in Toronto. And I remember thinking at the time that this film was about the relationship between the bloke making the film and the music. It's not about the relationship between you and the band. It's about the relationship between you and the music.
Yeah,
And I wondered, how did making the film change that relationship between you and the music?
actually that's a very good question, because I think what happened was I grew closer to the music and further away from the band. Um, and I not intentionally, and I don't mean it to sound like sour grapes or anything, because I the I don't I was friendly with Roger. I wasn't his friend. I don't think he would consider many people his real friend like that. And uh, Town Townsend, I never had really a relationship with, and that seemed to get worse. I don't know what I did to him. Maybe it's because I just wasn't his choice, and so he kind of resented that. Um, but I still could appreciate his music and his genius as a composer. Um, it's like me as a Jewish person saying I appreciate the music of Wagner, although he was a rabid anti-Semite who I'd want to punch in the nose. So it's like, you know, I can divorce the two things. And as for Entwistle, that came and went and became quite sour for reasons in the book that I thought he was had some obnoxious traits personally, uh, but he could be very pleasant and very nice as well. The one I really liked actually out of them all was Keith Moon. Um, despite I just found him like a big lovely child, and so once you realise that's the framework that you know, like a kid can throw a rubber ball at your head. With Keith Moon, it could be a car, but basically the thinking was very similar. He just was there to have fun. I don't, but I don't think that stopped me appreciating the music. I just kind of almost wished you could hold it in aspic at that point and like say that's the perfect rock band, and then like don't do anything else to muck it up. But unfortunately, time moves on and things change.
Well, I think in a way you did. Your Won't Get Fooled Again is the, to me, it's up there with Live at Leeds. It's one of the quintessential Who recordings.
Yeah, I
And
think
I
that's
would go
true.
so far to say, when I was younger and far more pretentious, I used to say that in your version of Won't Get Fooled Again, Daltrey's scream after the second bridge and the, was the greatest moment of rock and roll. Just that one.
I think you're right. I think that and Stein should get most of the credit for that. I think, and of course Roger. but I helped create that framework, and I certainly helped that make it happen, and did all kinds of things to engineer situations, which is what a film producer does if they're any good. And I forgive myself for some of these things that I let happen because I didn't let them happen. I was forced to let them happen. But I think the result was we got pretty close to what we had originally planned to do, which was kind of, I remember the term I used on my first script of it was Hell's a Poppin' meets the Marx Brothers. In rock and roll, that was what we were trying to get, was the exuberance, the joy, the power, all in one place. Like that scene in the Marx Brothers when like the opera, when they all when they go into the ocean liner and there's 100 people in one little room, and you just got to force to laugh because it's so brilliant. And it's kind of like that. And so we tried to let it play out in those senses. And when it came to a moment, and that's fun enough, I think we did combine. When, say, we were talking to Keith Moon or Malibu or Trancas, as I keep getting told, it's not Malibu, it's Trancas. Every time that he was bullshitting, like his answers, and then we said, "No, tell us the real truth." And he goes, "You can't afford the truth," type of thing. And it's absolutely right. It was a revelation. It got under the skin a bit enough to see something about them, and also looking back on it retrospectively, there were things in it that happened that I realized afterwards actually is very much more self-aware than you would think. Like when we were talking about doing, the scene at Shepperton and the things are arriving in the fire truck and all that. And I wanted to do a scene filming Roger arriving in his helicopter. And he absolutely banned it. He says there's no way. So it would be like that scene with Led Zeppelin arriving in the limo. He said, "Yeah, that's exactly right. There's no way you're filming it." He knew that would put him away from his core audience, which is basically was mod working class boys to start with.
Whenever he was on stage, he wasn't being the multi-millionaire trout farmer with the helicopter. He was being Rog from Acton.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons I think we got on, which is that not a lot of people know this, is I also grew up in Acton, and a couple of miles from him, and so we knew the same background, we knew the same streets and things. I'm not saying I mean I was the son of a very fast, upwardly mobile man, and so I went from Hackney via the Isle of Wight via Acton to Stanmore and was in Grosvenor Square by the time I was 14. So my streets were nice streets, but started off in the same places. And that's why a particular gift that my parents gave me was that I had experience across the board. Um, and I think that helped me understand them and them understand me a bit. And so, because the one thing I think they were with me, and I'm sure I was with them, was we were straight, we were honest. And so when other people were less so, it became very noticeable. But that's another area we won't bore people with at the moment. But it was the honesty that they have came through their music, in my opinion.
I think the one thing I discovered from the film most was that of all of them, Keith Moon was the beating heart of the band.
I couldn't hear that, sorry.
Sorry, Keith Moon was the beating heart of the band.
Yes.
And so I wasn't really surprised when, after he died, they never really managed anything great again.
Yeah, I think that's a very perceptive take on it. I think he was the heart. The rhythm came from John, and the brains came from Townsend, and the passion came from Roger.
Mm.
That's the mix, and it's a very unusual mix because it's four very different disparate people, and how it ever stayed together. One has to give credit to Kirbishley. how he kept that together, because I mean, that's an explosion waiting to happen every so often. But he did regard himself as the fifth member of the band, and to much of an extent, he was in his own way.
You know what? A film about McCurvishley would be a pretty interesting thing and hell to make. Absolute goddamn hell to make.
Well, I actually been asked to talk about doing one about him combined with Don Arden, could combine with Grant from Zeppelin, and there was another one. I can't remember, but it was like four like of that, and they were a particular type of person. Um, each of them very interesting, um, and sort of sum it up with Bill Graham, the promoter in America, who was also an interesting guy. I mean, how they worked with each other, and no one got killed. Well, not many, but they were tough boys, and I think that actually, I say it in the book, and I think it's true, is that the difference between British rock and American rock is actually summed up by those guys. But the street guys in England at that time were white working class guys. In America, the street guys were black working class guys, and therefore you got your Stevie Wonders and your people like that, and Michael Jackson. Very different type of breed. Not both hugely talented. I'm not trying to say up or down, but I'm just saying different. And the music of the American 50s and early 60s was Italian immigrant music, written by largely Jewish songwriters in the Brill Building. So they were a completely different thing. And they only started to have any kind of merger for FM radio after the Beatles invaded America. And so, that there's a very big difference in the psychology of those bands. When they were going, like when the Who, they were going to conquer America. And the interesting thing is, they're still, in my opinion, much bigger in America, the Rust Belt, than they are in England. They're very well known here, but the Who in America is like an institution, huge.
One thing about the time when the Who were at their greatest is that in those days, socially, music mattered. Do you
Music
think
matters.
music mattered? It doesn't now. Do you think it ever will again?
I think that's been hurt by the diffusion of the means of hearing it. We were coming through a kind of very narrow casting kind of thing. You either bought a record, and the record had to be on Radio Caroline or later Radio One, or it had to be on Radio Luxembourg, and in America FM type of radio. And so that was your access point. And so it's like the water cooler television. It was everybody was watching the same thing at the same time, the same night.
Hmm.
And so you had that opportunity. Now, I don't know where anybody is or watches anything, because there's 1,000 different ways. And so it's what comes through the street and so it doesn't come from the top down, it's coming from the bottom up. And so it's more diffuse. And so it'll matter, but not in the same way, because we're not getting, when you're watching, say, I remember going to the Top of the Pop studio and they were recording. And I think they told me, I don't remember the exact number. It was like 10 or 11 million people watching it. Now, if you've got 2 million, you're doing great. So the size of the pie for music and for films and television, the same thing. The size of the pie has stayed the same. Maybe the population's increased a bit, so the pie's got a little bit bigger, but the slices have got much narrower. So there's less for everybody. And that's why in the music business they had to do 360-degree deals, because there wasn't enough money to come from record sales. So I did a video for somebody a couple of years ago, but it was now 4 or 5 years ago, and they said to me that following week after it came out, they got 5 million views, and I said, "Oh, that's great," thinking, because I was still thinking in the old days, like 5 million records, so it's fantastic. And he said, "Yes, we got less, just under $500." And I thought, geez, 5 million views gets you $5 million. It's like how you can't make a living like that. You know, you've got a band to support and all the equipment and the traveling and all that. And so it's all become about the merchandise and the ticket sales and who owns the tour. And against that is who paying the costs and all of those kind of things that used to be pretty unbusinesslike have now become essentials. So yeah, it changed the music industry completely. So you get things like, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, because I admire the woman both as an artist and as a businesswoman, but people like Taylor Swift, who they become an enormous business situation. It's it's a whole brand thing. It's not just about music. It's not about record sales. That's coincidental with the whole brand. And I think that probably started with people like Madonna and has gone forward and become, like the generalization. Everybody wants to be Taylor Swift. And so I think that now we're in a different era. And I don't think anyone really knows the solution. I think it's gonna be different horses for courses. But you can't make a living out of being a recording artist alone now. It's not possible.